On a humid spring morning in Hong Kong, the quiet of a suburban street was shattered by the sudden arrival of police officers, their faces grim, their movements urgent. Neighbors peeked through curtains as whispers spread like wildfire. Something terrible had happened. No one yet knew the scale of the horror that was about to unfold, but within hours, the entire city would be gripped by shock and disbelief. This was not just another crime, it was the kind of nightmare that makes people question how well they really know those closest to them. And at the center of it all was a young man named Henry Chow, a man whose life had spiraled into darkness long before his name became infamous. Henry Chow was born on July 7, 1983, to Gloria and Moon Chow. To their neighbors, they seemed like an ordinary family, hardworking, kind, and devoted to giving their two sons the best future possible. Gloria and Moon had always believed that with patience and guidance, Henry would find his path. They paid for piano lessons, private tutors, and did everything within their means to help him grow into a respectable man. But behind closed doors, something much darker was brewing inside Henry. From a young age, Henry carried a quiet resentment that few noticed. He hated being forced into piano practice, hated the constant pressure to meet his parents' expectations. According to childhood friends, he once said in anger that his parents would regret everything one day. At the time, his words seemed like nothing more than the outburst of a stubborn child, dismissed as empty threats. But years later, those same words would resurface with chilling clarity. As Henry grew older, the gap between him and the rest of the world widened. In middle school, he struggled to fit in, never managing to form lasting friendships. Teachers described him as withdrawn, distracted, often lost in his own world. Soon he began skipping classes, failing exams, and eventually fell behind in school to the point that he couldn't even obtain a high school diploma. His parents, determined not to give up, decided to send him abroad to study in Australia. They hoped a fresh start in a new country might change his course. But instead of thriving, Henry sank deeper. In Australia, he faced bullying and discrimination, sometimes even physical violence. The humiliation cut deep, and he began to internalize every failure, every rejection, blaming his parents for forcing him down a path he never wanted. By 2003, he gave up entirely, dropping out of school and returning to Hong Kong. When Gloria and Moon asked how he had done, Henry lied, claiming he had successfully completed his studies. It wasn't long before the truth surfaced, leaving his parents disappointed and Henry feeling cornered. From that moment, he began shutting everyone out. He became secretive, spending more and more time online, immersing himself in virtual worlds where he could craft a life that wasn't his own. Among strangers on the internet, he revealed a disturbing side of himself, openly calling himself a psychopath, even using Adolf Hitler as his profile image. Most brushed it off as a sick joke, but behind those words was a young man unraveling. In the real world, his failures mounted. He couldn't keep a job, quitting or being fired within weeks. His relationships with women fared no better. He was often abandoned quickly. When one woman became pregnant, Henry pressured her to have an abortion. She refused, choosing instead to raise the child alone. Henry cut all ties and never looked back. Each rejection, each failure, seemed to harden him further. It was during this aimless period that Henry met a man who would later become both his accomplice and his pawn, Angus Tse. Angus, at 35, had already endured his own lifetime of heartbreak and betrayal. His first girlfriend had died tragically, his marriage collapsed when his wife admitted she only wanted Hong Kong citizenship, and his attempt at love in New Zealand ended with him being abandoned and penniless. By the time he returned to Hong Kong in 2010, he was a broken man, so depressed that he tried to take his own life multiple times. One suicide attempt involving mercury left his mind damaged forever. Henry saw something in Angus: weakness, vulnerability, and above all, someone he could manipulate. Compared to Henry's intelligence, Angus was simple-minded, eager for companionship, and easily swayed by the promise of friendship or even just a free meal. To Henry, he wasn't just a friend, he was a tool waiting to be used. By late 2012, Henry's life had reached a breaking point. He was drowning in debt, squandering money on expensive clothes and fine dining despite having no real income. His parents had given him everything they could, but Henry only saw it as his right to take more. Their patience wore thin. Gloria and Moon, now in their 60s, longed for peace in their retirement, but instead, they were stuck caring for a bitter and ungrateful son. Arguments in the family grew more frequent, often exploding into full-blown fights. The breaking point came in early 2013. Henry demanded that his parents sell their property and divide the money 3 ways. Gloria and Moon refused. They needed that home and savings to survive their later years. They told Henry it was time to move out and live on his own. Instead of accepting their decision, Henry stormed out, carrying only a few belongings and cut off contact. To his parents, it may have seemed like another heated quarrel, but to Henry, it was the final insult. In his silence, resentment boiled into hatred. And in the shadows of his mind, a sinister plan began to form. After Henry left his parents' apartment, Gloria and Moon hoped it was only a phase. Perhaps their troubled son just needed time to cool down. But Henry's absence wasn't temporary. He cut off all contact, disappearing into the shadows of Hong Kong's bustling streets. To those who knew him, it seemed like he had simply vanished. But behind closed doors, Henry was brooding, letting his bitterness fester into something poisonous. Weeks passed before Henry resurfaced, this time with a plan that revealed the true depths of his hatred. He convinced himself that his parents were the reason for every failure in his life, every humiliation, every missed opportunity. If only they were gone, he thought he could finally be free. It wasn't anger anymore, it was obsession. And that obsession needed an accomplice. Henry knew exactly who to turn to: Angus Tse. Angus was still reeling from his broken past, clinging to any form of companionship. To Henry, he was the perfect candidate, a man desperate for approval, easy to manipulate and too weak to resist. Henry played on Angus's fears, threatening to kill his mother if he refused to help. The manipulation worked. Angus agreed to do whatever Henry asked, sealing his fate in a nightmare he couldn't escape. In the weeks before the crime, Henry made preparations that now seemed chillingly methodical. He purchased a dozen knives, a microwave, 2 refrigerators, and even bags of cement and sand. These were not the actions of someone who snapped in a moment of rage. They were the actions of a man meticulously planning the destruction of the very people who gave him life. On March 1, 2013, Gloria and Moon were last seen alive. Henry lured them into Angus's small apartment on Fak Chong Street in the To Kwa Wan district. What happened inside those walls was brutal and unthinkable. According to Henry's later claims, an argument erupted, and in the chaos, Angus slit his father Moon's throat while Henry struck his mother Gloria on the head before cutting her throat as well. But Angus told a very different story, that Henry killed them both alone before dragging him into the aftermath. The truth remains clouded by their conflicting testimonies, but one thing was certain: the Chow parents never walked out of that apartment alive. 4 days afterward, Henry and Angus turned the small home into a scene of horror. The walls and floor were stained with blood, and trash bags filled with cement and sand were scattered around, hiding gruesome secrets. Neighbors later said they noticed strange smells, but no one could have imagined what was really happening. Inside the microwave, police would later discover yellowed fat and the sickening stench of cooked flesh. In the refrigerator, human heads were stored like grotesque trophies. Henry went even further. Obsessed with control, he documented everything in a notebook. Detailed instructions on how to dispose of the bodies, shopping lists, and even plans to scatter remains into the sea. When investigators uncovered this notebook later, it was undeniable proof that the murders weren't spontaneous, they were carefully orchestrated. Meanwhile, Henry tried to keep up appearances with his older brother, Ho. When Ho began to worry about their parents' silence, Henry reassured him with lies, saying Gloria and Moon had gone on a trip. Ho didn't believe him. Their parents were never out of touch for so long. His suspicions grew, and eventually he went to the police to report them missing. The family even created a social media group called Help Find Mom and Dad, pleading with the public for information. It was a desperate attempt born of love, but in reality, the very person responsible for their disappearance was participating in the charade. By mid-March, the pressure on Henry intensified. He had tried to mask the horror inside Angus's home, but the walls were closing in. And on March 15, 2013, the truth finally came to light. Police received a tip from a WhatsApp group chat. Henry himself had confessed in shocking detail. Officers rushed to the apartment, and what they found inside would leave even seasoned investigators shaken to their core. When the police stepped into Angus Tse's tiny apartment, the air was thick with a smell that defied description, a mixture of decay, rot, and something burnt. It clung to the walls, seeping into every corner, making seasoned detectives cover their mouths and noses. They were prepared for the worst, but nothing could have braced them for what lay ahead. The kitchen was the first stop. On the counter sat a microwave, its door slightly ajar. Investigators opened it and recoiled immediately. Inside, they found charred remains, human tissue blackened from heat, yellow fat congealed at the edges, and the unmistakable stench of cooked flesh. It was grotesque beyond imagination. The horror only grew as they moved deeper into the apartment. In the refrigerator, police discovered something more chilling: 2 severed heads. They were stored as if they were nothing more than leftovers, stacked behind containers of food. A body part wrapped in plastic was crammed into the freezer. Cement-filled trash bags lined the floor, each concealing more pieces of the Chows. The apartment wasn't just a crime scene, it was a house of death. Detectives pushed further inside and found the tools of the slaughter. A dozen knives lay scattered, stained and rusted. There were plastic sheets, gloves and bottles of cleaning fluid. And then came the most incriminating discovery: Henry's notebook. Page after page contained his handwriting, plans, instructions, calculations. The chilling record of a man who hadn't just killed but had meticulously prepared every step of the destruction. The grisly discovery stunned Hong Kong. News spread quickly, and the public reacted with outrage and disbelief. Gloria and Moon Chow were respected, kind people who had devoted their lives to raising their children. The idea that their youngest son, someone they had loved despite his troubles, could butcher them so cruelly was beyond comprehension. Police immediately arrested Henry and Angus. Both men were interrogated for hours, but their stories diverged almost instantly. Henry insisted that Angus had been the one who killed Moon during the struggle, claiming he only struck Gloria in self-defense. He painted himself as a reluctant participant, someone dragged into a nightmare. Angus, however, told a very different story. According to him, Henry killed them both and he, terrified for his life, was forced to help clean up afterward. The truth was clouded, but the notebook and the preparations told a story far more damning than Henry's excuses. He had purchased refrigerators, knives, cement, sand, even a microwave. These weren't panic-driven actions. They were the methodical steps of a man who had planned to erase his parents from existence. As investigators pieced together the timeline, they realized that after the murders, Henry hadn't been paralyzed by guilt. Instead, he had calmly continued with his daily routine. He spoke to his brother Ho, lied to friends, and even tried to live a normal life while his parents' remains lay hidden in Angus's apartment. But one mistake sealed his fate. On March 15th, Henry bragged about the murders in a WhatsApp group chat, typing out in shocking detail what he and Angus had done. It was as if he couldn't resist boasting about his crime. That reckless confession was what brought the police to the apartment in the first place. Without it, the Chow parents might have remained missing for far longer, their fate a haunting mystery. When news broke of the arrests, Henry's family and neighbors were devastated. Ho, his older brother, was especially shattered. Not only had he lost his parents, but he had to come to terms with the unthinkable, that his own brother had betrayed them in the most horrific way possible. Hong Kong's media dubbed the case the Tai Kok Sui double murder, or more chillingly, the microwave murders. The images from the crime scene, though too gruesome to release fully, circulated in whispers, fueling public fascination and horror. For many, it wasn't just the brutality of the killings that was disturbing. It was the cold, methodical way Henry had tried to destroy every trace of his parents, turning a family home into the setting of a nightmare. As the investigation moved forward, prosecutors prepared to build their case. But the defense would not be simple. Henry was cunning, manipulative, and ready to twist the story in any way possible to save himself. Angus, broken and submissive, became both a key witness and a suspect. Together, their conflicting accounts would drag the case into one of the most disturbing trials Hong Kong had ever seen. The trial of Henry Chow and Angus Tse began in the High Court of Hong Kong in late 2014, and from the very first day, it captivated the entire city. Every newspaper, every television station, every online forum buzzed with updates. The courthouse was packed with reporters, family members, and curious citizens, all desperate to witness how the fate of the two men would unfold. Henry sat at the defense table with a cold, almost indifferent expression. His neatly combed hair, pressed suit, and calm demeanor made him look more like a businessman than a man accused of butchering his parents. Angus, in contrast, appeared fragile and broken. His posture was slouched, his face pale, his eyes filled with fear. To the jury, the contrast between the two men was striking. The prosecution wasted no time painting Henry as the mastermind. They laid out his chilling notebook entries, the receipts for the refrigerators, knives, cement, and microwave. They presented the WhatsApp confession, a digital trail of arrogance and recklessness that tied him directly to the crime. Witnesses testified about Henry's financial struggles, his frustration with his parents, and his obsession with money. Angus, too, became a central figure. But unlike Henry, he was portrayed as a weak follower, a man manipulated and coerced into a nightmare far beyond his control. The jury listened carefully as Angus described how Henry had lured him into the plot, how he feared for his life if he didn't obey. His words painted Henry as a predator, someone who preyed not only on his parents but also on his friends' vulnerabilities. Henry's defense team, however, tried to shift the blame. They argued that it was Angus who had killed Moon during the struggle, while Henry had struck Gloria in panic, never intending to murder her. They painted him as impulsive, even desperate, but not a cold-blooded killer. They claimed the notebook was just the scribblings of a troubled young man, fantasies rather than premeditated plans. But the evidence was overwhelming. Every item purchased, every note written, every message sent told a story of calculation and intent. The jury wasn't just looking at a man who lost control in a moment of rage, they were looking at someone who had engineered the systematic destruction of his own family. When Henry took the stand, his testimony only worsened his situation. He spoke confidently, almost arrogantly, trying to outsmart the prosecution. But his words betrayed him. Instead of remorse, he exuded blame, self-pity, and a strange pride in his intelligence. The jury saw not a grieving son but a manipulator who believed he was smarter than everyone in the room. The verdict was inevitable. On March 20, 2015, the jury returned with their decision. Henry Chow was guilty of the double murder of his parents. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment, with a minimum of 36 years before parole could even be considered. For Angus Tse, the sentence was lighter but still devastating: life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 18 years. The court recognized his role as an accomplice but also acknowledged his fear and manipulation at Henry's hands. As the sentence was read, Ho Chow, Henry's surviving brother, sat in the courtroom, tears streaming down his face. He had lost his mother and father to unimaginable violence, and now his youngest brother to a lifetime in prison. It was a grief that words couldn't describe. The case left an indelible scar on Hong Kong. For years, people would speak of the microwave murders with horror. It wasn't just the brutality of the act, it was the betrayal, the cold planning, the utter disregard for humanity. Parents wondered how a child could grow up to destroy the very people who gave him life. Neighbors remembered Gloria and Moon as kind, generous, loving. Their tragic end became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how greed and resentment can twist a soul beyond recognition. In prison, Henry Chow continued to live in the shadow of his crimes. He became a symbol of arrogance brought low, a chilling example of how intellect without empathy can lead to destruction. Angus, too, faced a lifetime behind bars, haunted by the choices that chained him to Henry's madness. But for the people of Hong Kong, the story of the Chow family would never truly end. It remained etched in collective memory, not only as a tale of murder but as a tragedy of family, love, and betrayal. A reminder that evil can sometimes come not from strangers lurking in the dark, but from those sitting across the dinner table.